story. What an amazing story. Easter, as we know it, has been celebrated in one fashion or another since the mid-second century. And today there are Easter worship experiences of every kind happening all over the world. From the highest of the high church services that are being celebrated in the great cathedrals of the world, on down to humble services in foreign land shared in private homes with dirt floors. There are services that go on for hours and include multiple meals, and there are services where the entire service will take less time than this message. That's not this service. Easter transcends politics. Lines on the map, time zones, age, race, gender, ethnicity, all the things that too often are used as lines in the sand to separate humanity and build walls between us. But Easter is bigger than that. And frankly, when you think about it, after nearly 2,000 years and millions upon millions of Easter sermons preached, brothers and sisters, what is there left to say? It seems to me that the answer is either not much or everything. And every year we get to decide. This morning, with your kind permission, I'll offer no high theological Easter sermon. I'd just like to tell you a story. A story about telling the Easter story and what can happen. Now, I don't promise that this story is true, though it was told to me that it is true. And if it's not, well, doggone it, it should be. I heard it many years ago from a district superintendent who was a longtime friend of mine. And it's a story about a brand new pastor getting ready for his very first Easter sermon. And what happened to him. Now, I was asked to change the names and the locations to protect the innocent and the guilty. So I did both. Honestly, this story was told to me as pastor humor, such as that is, between two old pastors who were looking back and remembering their own first Easter sermons and how gung-ho, brand spanking new pastors right out of the box can be. But I admit when I first heard it, I found it humorous, but not funny, if you know what I mean. I found it more of a reminder on what a good Easter message should look like and when to share that message. But before we get into that, friends, let's take a moment to quiet our hearts and center ourselves in prayer. Gracious and loving God, here we are. Here we are. Right in the middle of Easter and all that that means for us. We're overwhelmed by empty tombs and resurrections and all that that can mean for us. But here we are to hear the Easter story one more time. One more time. Now, if we're to get past the words that are being spoken to and at us, well, we're going to need your help. So we ask that you open our eyes and our ears and especially our hearts to the word in store for us today. And my prayer, as always, is that you can help me find a way to get out of the way so that it's your word and not mine that comes through. Amen. Now, depending upon when you ask him, the Reverend Brad Smith had either just graduated or had finally escaped from theological training. And he thought he was just about ready for his very first Easter sermon. And brothers and sisters, that is a big deal. And though Brad had only been at his church, which happened to be his very first appointment, for a few months, he was well loved by the good folks at the Rising Sun, that's S-O-N, United Methodist Church, on Maple Street, right across from the feed store and right beside the Masonic Temple in Birch Grove, Illinois. He was well loved because he was young and excited about his faith, and he was determined to save the whole world all over again. He felt both honored and blessed to be at this humble church, a church well past its numerical, if not spiritual, heyday. Truth is, she was once quite the church, but now, well, she was a mere shadow of what she was. But don't tell Pastor Brad that. His DS mentioned that, well, she was dying, and he was being sent in there to help her die a graceful death. And Pastor Brad said, then don't send me, because I believe in resurrection. Naive, young Pastor Brad. They sent him anyway. I say Pastor Brad was well loved, and he was, but frankly his sermons they could use a little work. His congregation didn't have a clue what in the world he was talking about in his sermons, because their new pastor was the proud possessor of all the latest and most interesting theological concepts, and he liked to impress them with his education and his vocabulary. They loved him anyway. So bring on Easter. See, like most new pastors, he had made the final touches to his sermon on Holy Saturday morning and gave a preview to his patient wife, who had been his captive advance audience for every single sermon he had preached to this point, all 20 or so. Brad could hardly wait for this sermon. It was Easter, for Pete's sake. He told his wife that the sermon was based on the solid theology of Paul Tillich and spoke of the resurrection as a symbol that the estrangement from our authentic self was over. His audience of one rolled her eyes and shook her head again, but Brad didn't seem to notice again. He said this one would knock him dead, and she said, that's very likely. But she smiled because she loved him. Later that same Saturday evening, Brad drove to the church for the rehearsal of the sunrise service the next morning, and when the practice ended, one of the church youth called Tiny, because of course he stood 6'5" in his stocking feet. Well, Tiny asked Pastor Brad if he could give him a ride home. And Brad said sure, but since he was new to the area, Tiny would have to give him directions. So with Tiny pointing the way, he delivered the young man home without incident. But when he left, while he was still mentally rehearsing his first Easter sermon, which was going to knock him dead, and he couldn't remember if he was to turn right at the end of Tiny's street and then take a left at the crossroads, or was it the other way around? It had only taken a few minutes to reach Tiny's home, but after 20 minutes of driving around, he found himself on a deserted dirt road, totally lost. And when the car sputtered, he realized that he's out of gas too. Darn it. He had a sermon to get back to, an Easter sermon. And he did what every brand new pastor in this situation would do. He immediately started sweating bullets. Okay, he thought to himself, get a grip. It's 9 p.m. on Holy Saturday evening. I'm lost. I'm out of gas. It's completely dark. I have a dead cell phone. And I need to be in church by 6 a.m. for the sunrise service. No problem. I got this. So he took a bearing on what he thought would be the proper direction, got out of the car and began to walk. Several minutes later, he saw bright lights up ahead. As he drew closer, he could see that the lights came from a bar. The neon sign reading, Last Chance Bar and Goodies. And he thought, uh-oh. Really? Uh-oh. Everyone, and I mean everyone in town, including those new to the community like Brad, knew that this was a biker bar and a very good place to stay away from. See, shootings and stabbings were a regular part of the business there. Drugs could be bought and sold, and companionship could be purchased there, if you know what I mean. It was also on the outskirts of the murder capital of the good old USA, Gary, Indiana. But it wasn't like Brad had much of a choice, right? And he was a fearless man of God, right? And Jesus hung around rough, tough crowds, right? So he hitched up his confidence in his pants and he walked to the front door, past a large group of motorcycles, which made him very nervous. This was the place he had been warned about, and he was in real trouble. Now when he entered, he smelled stale beer and vomit, and the air was thick with smoke that was not cigarette smoke. He looked around and he didn't see anyone he recognized. And he wondered what his Step Parish members might think if they knew that their pastor was at the Last Chance Bar and Good Eats on Holy Saturday night. Best just not to think about that. Brad approached the bar intending to ask if it was possible for him to get a ride to town, but found himself ordering a Coke and noticing a pool table. For some stupid reason, he was soon engaged in a game. He had played pool since he was a kid and was good. On this night, he was fantastic. Twice ran the table from the break. His play was noticed by Big Jim, a short, powerful man who, taking off his leather jacket, challenged Brad to a game. He had a gun stuck in his belt. That did not calm Brad down. Now, Big Jim was good, but that evening Brad was better. After 3 consecutive wins, Jim conceded defeat, bought Brad another Coke, and announced that henceforth Brad would be called the Shark. He then asked the inevitable question, "What do you do?" "I'm for a living, I mean." "Well, what do you say?" Brad was tempted to tell an untruth, also known as a lie. But he summoned all his courage and said, "I'm a minister down in town at the Church of the Rising Sun," that's S-O-N, United Methodist Church. You know the one on Maple Street? They did not know the one on Maple Street. The crowd began to frown and grumble. But from the background, Big Jim bellowed, "Shut up, damn it." Immediately the mood in the bar changed, and for some reason, the patrons, one by one, began to tell Brad their story. And their stories broke his heart. When Big Jim's turn came, he said, "I've never been to church. My mom wasn't married, so people told her she wasn't good enough to go to church, and I said, to hell with them. What I know about the Bible comes from TV, and I don't believe any of it. I don't even know what it is that you Bible thumpers celebrate on Easter." All the eyes in the place focused on Brad, who realized that Big Jim had just called him out, and like it or not, he had to respond. He remembered that his mom had wanted him to be a dentist. Right idea. He knew for sure his clever theological training would help him now. These people wanted the plain truth. So, with a very dry mouth, Brad slowly began to talk about Jesus. Right there in the middle of the Last Chance Bar and Good Eats, Brad told Big Jim everything he could think of. He told him about Jesus' birth and how when Jesus was ready, he started a public ministry, and the patrons thought it was a good idea that Jesus had a job, but, well, they weren't sure what kind of job the ministry might be for a carpenter's boy. Seemed a bit of hoity-toity to them. And Brad told them that those who were rich and powerful had little faith in or time for Jesus, so Jesus reached out to those who were despised by society at large. Now they were listening. They connected with this Jesus. Brad said that Jesus had demonstrated an amazing kind of love in every word and action of his life. They thought that was good of Jesus to do that. They'd seen little of that kind of thing in their own lives. But now Brad had a head of steam going, so he charged right on. And after 3 years of ministry in the marginalized people around the countryside of Israel, Jesus turned towards the capital city of Jerusalem to share the message there. Although he had done many wonderful things and taught people about the love of God, he was arrested on trumped-up charges and tried in a kangaroo court. He was found guilty of high crimes against Rome, the temple, and God, and one man in the back said he probably had the same dang lawyer. Jesus was nailed to a cross and mocked, which they didn't think was right. Because most of them, that's all they felt in their life was scorn and mockery. He said that Jesus' followers abandoned him, save for some women who had watched all these horrible things take place. Beaten, tortured, and spit upon, he died on the cross after about 3 hours, and they took him and laid him in a borrowed tomb. While hearing the story, several of those people, those hardcore bikers, began to cry openly. It wasn't fair what those people did. He wasn't even guilty. Why didn't God come down there and kick their wage? Said Pastor Brad. He wasn't done. And they said, there's more? Brad just grinned and said, fellas, I'm just getting warmed up. So then he told the men that on Easter Sunday, Jesus' friends went to the tomb, but they met two angels who told them, well, Jesus wasn't there anymore. He was alive. Just like he said. Later that day, Jesus appeared to his friends, the same ones who abandoned him just days before, and Big Jim said, did he punch him? Brad said, no, he just loved him. Big Jim and the others were impressed, but they said, dude, that is one crazy story. And Brad responded, maybe you've noticed it's one crazy world. But God loves us anyway. And will always be there for us. And that's the truth. And by raising his son from the dead, God destroyed death forever for all of us. God offers us all fresh starts and second chances no matter what we've done. He turns losers like us into winners. And several said, wouldn't that be nice? When Brad was done, it was quiet. So Brad told Big Jim about his car problem. And quickly the rugged biker siphoned some gas from a bike that was not his own. Took Brad to his car and gave him directions home. And when he got home at 3 a.m., his wife, who was worried, sick, told her husband that he needed to get to bed and get some rest. And he said, no, I need to rewrite my sermon. And by golly, he did. So Easter dawned bright and clear, and Pastor Brad did not talk about new being or any estrangement from authentic selfhood, whatever in the heck that got. He simply told the story of how God raised Jesus from the dead, and in the process gave all of us new life and new hope. People in the congregation were delighted that he had finally preached a sermon in English. They thought the sermon was really good, but frankly, it wasn't as exciting as what really got him talking. See, apparently that Easter, well, they had a full house. First one in a long time. They had a new, somewhat strange, and very large group of visitors that morning who parked their shiny motorcycles on the lawn of the church. And they sat in the front pews. Never before had such a collection of beer and liquor logo t-shirts been seen at the church Son, S-O-N, United Methodist Church. But they were clean. Their language was a bit salty, and there's no need to even attempt to say what they sounded like when they sang, but they sure sang loud. And when one of the ushers inquired about what brought the visitors to that particular church, one burly man, obviously uncomfortable in church, growled, "We're drinking buddies and Pastor Sharp." Maybe last night at the Last Chance Bar, nearly 3 this morning, all the way in. Did a good job. Pastor Smith's encounter is the story of transformation and conversion. The movement from death to a new, real life, based upon the sharing of the Easter story. A chance and absolutely unintended meeting between a young and inexperienced pastor who preached his first Easter sermon on Saturday night in a biker bar to a bunch of misfits and left behind. A sermon which allowed Brad and the bikers to cast off the blindness that had kept them in darkness and to discover a new dawn never before explored by either party. But here they were. When the chips were down, that young pastor remembered what needed to be remembered. And he didn't wait till Sunday morning. But if the heart of this story is true, as I was told it was, this young pastor got it right. And I pray he's still getting it right. And if he is, it's likely that he's the pastor of a middle-sized church with little flash and sizzle, but filled with a congregation that gets it. Maybe just like this one. A church that no longer points fingers at those people because they know that they are largely now those people. They'll never make a huge salary, but God and He will build a solid congregation that makes a genuine difference in their community. But friends, if you didn't get it right, if that experience was an accident, he's likely either selling insurance now, or his story alone will have propelled him into larger and larger churches filled with people who are delighted to have a pastor that really doesn't expect much from him and is always looking for the next programmatic flash in the pan as the next big thing to drag the church into relevance and favor. Now, I have nothing against trying new things, as long as we remember our primary task is to tell the story that we already know well. God loves us. He gave us life and set us free, and when we bumped into our own greed and arrogance, He loved us enough to send people to bring us back. And when we didn't get it and didn't come, He sent more than someone to tell us what to do. He sent us His Son to show us how to do it. And when it became obvious that we wouldn't or couldn't get to Him, well, He came to us. Not as king, but as a carpenter's son with a simple message. God loves every person on this planet. And then when push came to shove, and it was obvious even to a loving parent like God that humanity had missed the boat and was striving for power and wealth instead of relationships with others, well, God paid the price on Good Friday that we couldn't pay. He was betrayed by one of His own, arrested by the temple, delivered to the conquerors, tried by their laws, beaten and executed as a lesson to the world that you can't fight City Hall. And boy, were they in for a surprise. Right? So they executed Him and placed Him in a borrowed tomb with guards. Now, who ever heard of guards in a tomb? Who escaped that? Well, surprise, surprise. Someone did. The world has never been the same since. Not perfect. Not united. Not always peaceful or loving or sharing. There's people like us with a story to tell of a life worth living and relationships worth having with our God and our families and friends and legions of others that need to hear the story and then see it lived out. Friends, that's the real Easter message. And the best time to share it is any and every time you can. There's power in that story to change lives. And it still does just that. Amen. May you be saved.